The first inklings of dread came to me in the form of a letter. I had scarcely returned to my modest abode on the outskirts of Arkham when I found the envelope waiting on my desk. Though I had no memory of leaving the door ajar for anyone to place it there. The paper was a brittle, yellowing parchment, sealed with an emblem I did not recognize. It was a serpent devouring its tail, encircled by jagged glyphs that seemed to shift when viewed askance. It bore an aura of antiquity and unease, as if it had been plucked from a forgotten epoch. I hesitated before breaking the seal, an inexplicable weight pressing against my chest. It was as if the letter itself emanated a silent warning, urging me to leave its contents unread. But curiosity, that most dangerous of human impulses, got the better of me. The handwriting within was jagged and frantic, as though scrawled by a trembling hand. To the one who dares to uncover truths best left buried. The tide brings more than seaweed and brine. It whispers, it watches. The depths hunger for what lies above. Come, if you must, to the crumbling house at the edge of the reef. The answers await, though you may wish you had not sought them. Written by a friend. I read the letter twice, each word sinking into my mind like a shard of ice. The phrasing was cryptic, yet its meaning seemed clear enough. Someone or something was beckoning me to that ill-framed town of Innsmouth. The very name sent a shiver down my spine, conjuring images of a desolate harbor and shadowed alleys, where whispers of unspeakable things clung to the salt-laden air. The night passed fitfully, my dreams invaded by shifting, shapeless forms and the low murmur of a distant tide. When morning came, I resolved to make the journey. I told myself it was to satisfy a scholarly curiosity, but deep down, I knew there was another force at work, a compulsion that defied reason. By dawn, I had packed my bag with only the essentials and boarded the rickety train that wound its way toward the coast. The journey was uneventful at first, though it seemed to stretch endlessly, as if time itself resisted my approach to that cursed place. The landscape grew bleaker with each passing mile, the rolling hills giving way to brackish marshes and twisted trees that clawed at the overcast sky. The townsfolk who boarded along the way were gaunt and sallow-skinned, their features marred by an unwholesome pallor. They spoke in low murmurs, their accents thick and guttural. And their eyes, they glinted with an unnatural gleam, as if some deep-seated hunger burned behind them. When the train at last screeched to a halt at the decrepit Innsmouth station, I was greeted by a suffocating wall of briny air. The platform itself was almost deserted, save for a few hunched figures who watched me with a peculiar intensity. The town lay sprawled before me, a tableau of decay and despair. Buildings leaned at precarious angles, their facades streaked with moss and rot. The streets were narrow and uneven, slick with an oily film that shimmered darkly in the wan light filtering through the clouds. Clutching the letter as though it might shield me from the growing unease, I made my way through the labyrinthine streets. The address scrawled within led me to a crumbling manor perched on the edge of the reef. Its warped wooden frame seemed to sag under its own weight, as if the years had been unkind. The surrounding grounds were overgrown with thorny vines and rank briny weeds. Above the doorframe, strange symbols were carved into the weathered wood. Symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when I tried to focus on them. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock. The sound echoed hollowly, swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive silence. Moments passed, each one heavier than the last, before the door creaked open of its own accord. Beyond lay an interior shrouded in shadows, reeking of salt and mildew. Hesitation rooted me to the threshold, but an unseen force seemed to pull me inside, my curiosity battling fiercely with the mounting fear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the suffocating stillness. The air grew colder with each step, and the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, as if protesting my intrusion. The walls were lined with shelves crammed with books. Not ordinary tomes, but volumes bound in cracked leather and etched with unholy symbols. Many bore titles in languages I could not decipher, their spines warped, as though they had been soaked in seawater and left to dry. As I ventured deeper into the house, a faint sound reached my ears. A rhythmic, wet slapping, as though something heavy and damp was dragging itself across the floor. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The sound came from below, drawing me inexorably toward a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. The staircase was narrow and steep, the wood slick with moisture. My descent was slow, each step taken with trepidation. The air grew thicker as I went, the salty tang giving way to an otherworldly aroma that defied description. The sound itself grew louder, now accompanied by a low, guttural hum that seemed to reverberate within my very bones. At last, the stairs ended in a cavernous chamber, hewn from the bedrock itself. The walls glistened with moisture and strange markings, similar to those on the doorframe. In the center of the chamber was a pool of water, impossibly black and still, as though it were a void rather than a liquid. Surrounding the pool were figures, cloaked in tattered robes. Their faces were obscured by deep hoods. They chanted in low, guttural tones that seemed to form a cadence both alien and eternal. One of the figures turned to me, its movements slow and deliberate. With a bony hand, it pulled back its hood, revealing a visage that defied all natural order. Its features were a grotesque amalgamation of man and fish, with bulbous, unblinking eyes and skin that glistened like wet scales. The thing opened its mouth, and the sounds that emerged were not words, but a series of clicks and gurgles that seemed to bypass my ears and burrow directly into my mind.
"The depths call,"
the creature's thoughts intoned.
"And you have answered. Step closer and behold the truth of the tides."
With a bony hand, it pulled back its hood, revealing a visage that defied all natural order. Its features were a grotesque amalgamation of man and fish, with bulbous, unblinking eyes and skin that glistened like wet scales. The thing opened its mouth, and the sounds that emerged were not words but a series of clicks and gurgles that seemed to bypass my ears and burrow directly into my mind. "The depths call," the creature's thoughts intoned. "And you have answered. Step closer and behold the truth of the tides." Despite my terror, my feet moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the pool. The water began to ripple as I approached, the surface breaking to reveal something rising from the depths. It was vast beyond comprehension, a mass of writhing tendrils and gleaming, unblinking eyes. Its form shifted and rippled, defying the limits of three-dimensional space. I fell to my knees, my mind teetering on the brink of madness. The chanting grew louder, a cacophony of eldritch voices that threatened to drown my very soul. The creature's gaze bored into me, and I knew then that I had gazed upon something forbidden, something mankind was never meant to witness. And yet, even as I trembled on the edge of oblivion, I felt a part of me drawn to it, yearning to join it in the depths. The whispers of the tide grew louder, promising knowledge, power, and an eternity beyond mortal comprehension. But at what cost? I awoke on the cold stone floor of the cavern, though I had no memory of falling unconscious. The air was heavy with a sickly humidity, and the low chanting of the robed figure still echoed around me. The creature, the vast and incomprehensible entity that had risen from the black pool, was gone, though its presence lingered in the form of a strange vibration that resonated deep within my bones. My head throbbed with a dull ache, and my thoughts felt sluggish, as though I were trying to piece together a dream that had been shattered upon waking.
"You have seen!"
came a voice from the shadows. I turned, my movement stiff and hesitant, to see one of the cloaked figures standing apart from the rest. Its hood was drawn, concealing its features, but the air around it seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy.
"The tide has shown you what lies beneath. Now you must decide."
Decide? I croaked, my voice hoarse and trembling. Decide what? What is this place? What have I seen? The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it gestured toward the pool, its surface now eerily calm.
"The depths hold many secrets,"
it said. Its voice was raspy and almost inhuman.
"They whisper to those who listen, offering knowledge, power, and freedom from the chains of mortality. But such gifts come at a price."
The words sent a chill through me. What price? I demanded, though I was not certain I truly wished to know. The figure did not respond, but its silence spoke volumes. I felt a creeping dread take hold, as if I were teetering on the edge of an abyss, staring into a darkness that stared back.
"You were chosen," it said finally. "The tide called you, and you answered. Now you must go deeper."
Before I could protest, the other robed figures began to move. Their chant grew louder, a discordant melody that seemed to twist the very fabric of reality. The walls of the cavern shimmered and warped, and the air grew thick with an unseen force that pressed against my skin. The pool began to ripple again, its surface breaking apart to reveal a staircase of slick black stone descending into the water. "Deeper?" I echoed, my voice barely audible over the rising cacophony. "You expect me to go into that?" The figure stepped closer, and I caught a glimpse of something glinting beneath his hood. A pair of unblinking eyes, too large and too round to belong to anything human.
"You seek the truth, do you not? You came to this place because you were drawn to the whispers. The depths hold the answers you crave. But you must be willing to descend."
I wanted to refuse, to turn and flee from this nightmare. But my body betrayed me. My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the black pool and the staircase that descended into its murky depths. The closer I came, the stronger the vibrations grew, until it felt as though my entire being was resonating with the unearthly rhythm of the chanting. The water lapped at my ankles as I stepped onto the first step, cold and strangely vicious, like liquid shadow. I cast one final glance over my shoulder, hoping for some sign of reprieve. But the figures merely watched in silence, their hooded faces unreadable. The descent was agonizingly slow. Each step seemed to stretch into eternity, the darkness pressing in around me like a living thing. The water rose steadily, chilling me to the bone as it climbed past my knees, then my waist, and finally my chest. The air grew thinner, and I found myself gasping for breath as the blackness swallowed me whole. The vibrations were deafening now, a relentless pulse that seemed to emanate from the very marrow of the earth. And just as I thought I could go no further, the staircase ended, and I found myself standing on a solid surface. The water receded, though the air remained heavy and damp. A faint bioluminescent glow illuminated the chamber, revealing walls covered in strange pulsating growths that writhed and shifted as though alive. The floor was slick, with a thin iridescent film that shimmered like oil on water. And in the center of the room stood a monolithic structure, its surface etched with the same shifting symbols I had seen on the doorframe above. The monolith exuded an aura of immense power, and as I approached, I felt a strange compulsion to place my hand upon its surface. But the moment my fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through me, and my mind was flooded with visions. I saw vast cyclopean cities rising from the ocean floor, their spires piercing the surface like the teeth of some monstrous leviathan. I saw creatures, impossible, grotesque beings that defied all natural law, swimming through the black abyss, their eyes gleaming with ancient intelligence. And I saw humanity, small and insignificant, teetering on the edge of oblivion as the tide threatened to rise and consume all. The visions faded, leaving me trembling and breathless. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, my mind reeling from the weight of what I had seen. The chanting had ceased, and the chamber was silent, save for the sound of my ragged breathing.
"Do you understand now?"
came the voice of the cloaked figure, though I could not see where it was coming from.
"The tide does not merely bring the sea to the shore. It is a force, a will, A hunger that cannot be sated. To join it is to transcend the limits of flesh and time. To resist is to be consumed.
I struggled to form words, but my voice failed me. The monolith pulsed faintly, as if alive, and I felt its call deep within my soul. It promised understanding, power, and an escape from the futility of existence. But it also promised something darker, something that threatened to strip away everything that made me human. As I lay there, caught between terror and temptation, I realized that my choice had already been made. The tide had claimed me long before I had set foot in Innsmouth, and there was no turning back now. The air around me seemed to ripple, bending under the weight of some unseen force. The monolith stood silent and still, yet its presence dominated the chamber, a pulsating reminder of the choice I had yet to fully comprehend. My body trembled as I knelt on the slick, iridescent floor, my mind unraveling beneath the gravity of the visions it had been forced to endure. I could not escape the feeling that I was no longer in a place meant for mortals. This was a realm beyond the veil, where the laws of nature and sanity held no longer.
You linger,
the voice of the robed figure whispered, though it no longer seemed distant. It was as if the sound emanated from the very air around me, seeping into my thoughts.
You fear the tide, but you cannot deny it. The depths have called, and they will not be ignored.
I looked up, my vision blurred by a cold sweat that dripped down from my brow. The robed figure loomed above me, its form shifting and indistinct, as though it were more shadow than substance. Its face remained obscured, yet I could feel its gaze piercing through me, seeing every corner of my fractured soul. What do you want from me? I rasped, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heart.
Not want,
the figure replied.
Need. The tide does not bargain. It consumes and transforms. You are but a vessel, chosen to carry its will. To resist is futile.
A wave of despair washed over me, but alongside it came something else. A faint flicker of defiance. I didn't ask for this, I said, my voice steadier now, though my body still quaked. I didn't choose to be part of whatever this is. The figure tilted its head, and for a moment, the room seemed to darken.
Choice is an illusion of the surface. The tide's pull is eternal, its will inexorable. You came here because you were meant to.
I wanted to refuse its words, to argue that I was a victim of happenstance, that my journey to this accursed place had been nothing more than a tragic accident. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. The letter, the dreams, the compulsion that had driven me to Innsmouth. It all pointed to something far greater than coincidence. The tide had indeed chosen me, though I could not fathom why. What happens if I refuse? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The figure's response was not verbal. Instead, it extended a skeletal hand, pointing toward the pool at the center of the chamber. The water rippled and churned, and from the depths rose a shape so grotesque, so alien, that my mind recoiled in terror. It was vast and formless, a writhing mass of tendrils and eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. Its surface was slick and iridescent, like oil on water, and its every movement seemed to defy the constraints of time and space.
This is the tide,
the figure said. its voice reverberating through the chamber.
To resist is to be unmade, to be devoured and forgotten. To accept is to transcend, to become one with the eternal flow.
The creature's many eyes fixed on me, and I felt a crushing weight settle over my chest. It was not merely fear. I felt but an overwhelming sense of insignificance. Before this being, I was less than nothing, a mote of dust adrift in an infinite void. My instinct screamed at me to run, to escape this nightmare, but I knew there was nowhere to go. The tide would find me, no matter how far I fled. And if I accept? I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw its face. It was not a face at all, but a swirling vortex of darkness, its edges flickering like flames.
You will become more than you are,
it said.
You will see beyond the veil, beyond the petty concerns of your fleeting existence. You will join the tide and know its secrets. But you will no longer be what you were. You will belong to it, body and soul.
I stared at the figure, at the monolith, at the writhing abomination in the pool. My mind raced, torn between the promise of knowledge and the terror of what it might cost me. Was this what I had sought all along? Had I been driven here by a thirst for understanding, or had I simply been caught in the tide's inexorable pull? The chanting resumed, low and guttural, and the chamber seemed to vibrate with its resonance. The pool's surface roiled, and the creature began to rise further, its tendrils reaching toward me like the branches of some otherworldly tree. The air grew heavier, and I felt my knees buckle once more. The tide was calling, and I could not ignore it. With a final trembling breath, I stepped forward. My foot touched the edge of the pool, and the water, if it could be called water, clung to me like a living thing. It was cold and vicious, yet it seemed to pulse with a warmth that seeped into my skin. As I waded deeper, the chanting grew louder, until it was all I could hear. The figures stood in a circle around the pool, their faces obscured, their voices united in a single unearthly rhythm. The creature's tendrils reached for me, and I felt them wrap around my body, pulling me into its embrace. There was no pain, only a strange numbing sensation as my flesh began to dissolve, merging with the writhing mass. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping away, my thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. Yet, even as I faded, I felt a new awareness take hold. A vast, incomprehensible consciousness that stretched beyond the limits of time and space. I was no longer myself. I was part of the tide, part of the eternal flow. The secrets of the universe unfolded before me, their truths both beautiful and terrible. I saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars, and the endless dance of creation and destruction that defied existence. And I understood. At last the tide was not merely a force, but a being, a will that sought to unite all things in its endless embrace. As my old self faded into oblivion, I felt a strange sense of peace. The tide had claimed me, and I was no longer alone. I was part of something greater, something eternal. The surface world with its petty concerns and fleeting lives was a distant memory, and I no longer mourned its loss. The tide had taken me, and I was finally whole.